The next speaker is David Silverman, co-author of Team of Teams and founder and CEO of CrossLead. Mr. Silverman spent 13 years as a U.S. Navy SEAL, leaving as a lieutenant commander. I am such a huge fan of his book, and every time I talk with him, I learn so much. He describes the incredible story of why, in 2004, the Joint Special Forces Task Force was failing to achieve its mission of dismantling al-Qaeda in Iraq, and what they did about it. Their work led to not only them achieving their strategic objectives, but also led to a deep and critical rethinking of almost everything across all the U.S. military services and in commercial industry as well. What's so amazing to me is that everything he talks about I know will resonate deeply with the DevOps Enterprise community. I asked him to be as specific as possible about the outcomes of their work. Regardless of your opinions on that war, I know you'll appreciate the impact that their new ways of thinking and operating enabled. Please welcome Dave Silverman.
Thank you, Gene. I'm excited to be here at the DevOps Enterprise Summit. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of CrossLead and how we created a team of teams when we were trying to fight against al-Qaeda. This story starts from a personal standpoint with myself, so a little bit of background to help set the stage. I grew up a military brat, bouncing around the country. I moved to more than 9 schools in 12 years, and every time I tried to assimilate into a new community, my father and mother would put me into a team of some type. By the time I got to high school, I sort of realized that what I was sort of good at was aquatic sports, specifically water polo, and I was fortunate enough to be on a super high-performing team. When you're trying to figure out what you're going to do next stage of your life, because at this point, all I really understood was being a student athlete, I wanted to follow my father's footsteps as service, and so I decided to join the Navy, went to the Naval Academy, and ultimately I was trying to become a Navy SEAL. The reason why was because there's no professional sports in water polo really in the United States. And so the highest form of a team that was elite that I could find, at least that I think made sense for me, was the Navy SEAL team. So I graduated the Naval Academy in '98, went on to SEAL training in San Diego, California. This is an image of me and some of my counterparts being surf tortured in the water as they were forging young men into what would become later frogmen. And graduated in the early winter of 1999. And out of the original 165 guys that started in our class, only 19 of us graduated. We would go on to the SEAL teams, and this is again pre 9/11, and had a pretty amazing experience. And then 9/11 happened, our entire world changed, and several deployments later, I would find myself in Baghdad commanding forces that was trying to compete against an enemy that was morphing and changing pretty quickly. And this became sort of the foundational experience for me operationally. And when we got back, a group of us got together and we tried to capture the core lessons of this experience, this culture change initiative that took place over many years in the book Team of Teams. So to understand the history, it's important to sort of go back to the inception of special operations in the United States. Over time, there's always been people that have been called up to do things that most other people didn't want to do or wouldn't do in service of the nation. And in the early 1980s, actually 1979, during the failed Iranian hostage rescue attempt, there was a big study done that said, hey, what happened? Why aren't we capable of actually achieving our objectives? And so out of that, they formed Joint Special Operations Command. And they quickly assimilated the best special operations components around the different services into a comprehensive unit. Its unclassified mission was to come up with training tactics and procedures for how you would combat terrorism threats around the globe. Its classified mission was to be a standing task force that would respond in 96 hours or less to any threat around the world. And very quickly, this organization became part of a much larger counterterrorism apparatus that involved several different government organizations. These highlight sort of the top ones: the CIA, the National Security Agency, the Homeland Security, and the FBI. And very quickly, this organization in the 80s and 90s became world-class. We learned how to operate inside of our bureaucracy, and we had great success operating around the battlefield. But our core fundamental challenge was that we were very tribal and siloed in nature. And while this theoretically allowed the organization to compete effectively, so for instance, in our case, the SEALs and the Army's Delta Force were sort of rivals. And the idea was that rivalry would actually create a better outcome. That also became gaps and seams that would become difficult for us to overcome as the world started to change. Our enemy also was born around the same time we were in the early 80s. They were Al-Qaeda originally, found its legs in the prisons of Egypt, would start to form into a unit in Afghanistan fighting against the Soviets. And after that global jihad, they went back and dispersed across more than 47 countries where they started to take root and started to grow and flourish. Over time, this enemy was pretty different than previous terrorist threats that we were used to dealing with. In fact, when after 9/11, we were trying to figure out how to combat this threat, we wanted to see the enemy how we looked at ourselves, meaning it looked like some type of leadership structure where if you could decapitate the top, they call it the 2+7, in this case, bin Laden and Zawahiri and his 7 operational lieutenants, you could theoretically have decisive effects. But the reality was the enemy was very different than most organizations that we'd come up against previous to this. It operates much more analogous to a network where it morphed and changed and metastasized in ways that were counterintuitive to a traditional hierarchical structure. And it was leveraging technology that was exploding onto the market in the early 2000s associated with mobile and social. And by leveraging these tools, its ability to communicate and disseminate key lessons and learnings rapidly across different geographies was effectively frictionless. And so very quickly, this organization that was highly nimble and agile started to have decisive effects against what we consider to be an elite but very consistent hierarchical organizational construct associated with counterterrorism. So